The atmosphere in Washington right now is a little bit like North Korea. Republicans, businessmen, everybody is kind of like looking to the dear leader to understand, reading his lips, all the people down the food chain. Like, what are we got to do, to get in his good books? Because if you put one foot wrong, boy, you're out, you're gone.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Readiness Report with me, Redi Tlhabi. We hung out yesterday on what I think was a very significant day on the news calendar. It is of interest to me as a journalist, but also as a South African living in Washington, D.C. President Cyril Ramaphosa and his entourage, his delegation, they arrived at the White House to what many of us would call an ambush. And I see a whole lot of debate. A lot of you are weighing in. He should have done this. He should have done that. I think so too. I think there was space to push back a little bit, especially with the data and the statistics on the crime situation in South Africa. He addressed it, but I thought that he was a bit generic instead of really zoning in on the forensic evidence about the nature of crime in South Africa. I've also been following some of your comments about the golfers, whether they were a liability or an asset to South Africa. I think it was important to have them in that room. And disclaimer, I'm a huge fan of Johan Rupert, so it's not good for me to comment about what he did or didn't say. Some of you have been talking about any else and Retief, that there was a swart gevaar tone to Retief's commentary and that they could have done this, they could have done this. Look, I thought about that, but later on I reflected that if it looked like a PR stunt, that's not real. If it looked too staged, then I don't know whether it would have made an impression. I think there's space for us to acknowledge our fears, our anxiety, our vulnerability, like Retief did, but say ultimately, even in spite of all of that, my family is still choosing to live in South Africa. That's just the first thing. The other thing I just want to say is that there was a program that was released in DC. The journalists received it the night before the meeting. I don't know when the South Africans received it, but we have a very funny addiction to secrecy in South Africa. I think government spokespeople, they just hold on to something for too long instead of just laying it out there. Not everything is a secret. Not everything is sensitive. Not everything is controversial. Anyway, what was supposed to happen was a private meeting in the cabinet room and then the theatrics in the Oval Office. At the last minute, what do these ANC people do when they sing at their branches? It means things will just turn around. Even at soccer matches, people sing that song. Okay, so things turned. President Ramaphosa was in the Oval Office before he was supposed to be, and you were all there watching it. My impression, I think that there was never not going to be drama. This is Donald Trump. That's his impulse. That's his oxygen. He can't be normal like the rest of us. He created a false sense of security. I thought they did very well. The camaraderie in the beginning, talking about golf, just establishing a familiarity and warmth. But now that it has happened, now that what happened, I think Trump was sitting there salivating, impatient, waiting for the niceties to end because he had a film and a movie to show us all. And the whole world must now be in a state of paralysis because of Julius Malema, a firebrand who is a leader of a party that got 9%, 8%? I can't even keep up. That's not growing its election pie. And then on the global stage, to amplify that kind of voice, give him the kind of prominence I think he didn't deserve. But of course, it served Donald Trump and your MAGA and your right-wing elements in South Africa that are pushing this white genocide. I do think that the president of South Africa could have done a little bit more of the data work, but from a tone, composure, self-mastery, I think he did well. I think it was very clear at some point who was the adult in the room and who was the child, who was the performer and who was someone looking for constructive engagement. Okay, so I thought to make sense of what happened at the White House yesterday, but a broader commentary about US-SA relations, why not bring someone that I adore. He's a formidable editor, a former editor of the Mail and Guardian. He lives in DC. He knows everybody here. He likes he just knows everybody here. So that's the person who can make sense of what happened for us. A great South African who's also in DC like me. Phillip Van Niekerk, hello.
Hello.
How are you?
Wow, that was quite an intro.
I like talking. That's why I'm here.
Yeah.
Okay, so yesterday happened. I think, can I just be honest and tell everyone that we were anxious? We spoke about it privately. We were anxious not because we doubt Team South Africa, but anxious because we know this town. Your impressions of what you saw.
Well, I think that Trump did a number for his MAGA, kind of white nationalist base, who have a real kind of connection with this kind of very marginal fringe group of Afrikaners. And, I think that was performative. I think that was to sort of get the politics out the way. I think if you look at the longer, in the longer sort of frame of it, I think that Cyril, first of all, in terms of how Americans saw it, the vast majority of Americans saw Trump behaving in his usual kind of deranged, kind of absolutely almost sort of obscene kind of way that you invite somebody to the White House and then you try and humiliate them with a fake video and with nonsense kind of press cuttings. Most people saw that and they saw Cyril being, very calm, very collected, very measured. He didn't need the data. People knew that it was BS, that what Trump was talking about. But I do think that, Cyril was able to get several things done. I think, first of all, he needed to get some kind of trade negotiation on track because, it's very unlikely that South Africa will still be in a GOA, if there's a GOA at all, after September. And so we need to get a bilateral trade deal with the United States, which is not a bad thing. We've got one with the EU, we've got others in elsewhere in the world. And so, I think that he needed to get the building blocks. I mean, you and I together, we were on Capitol Hill a couple of weeks ago, and we know that people were saying the door was shut. We don't want to talk to South Africa. We don't care. We're not interested. And so, what he achieved, was to actually get a process going where you can actually sit down and have a rational discussion and make a trade deal. I think Trump came away at the end of that meeting. He seemed to have softened on a couple of things. First is he seemed to be open to the idea of coming to the G20. Mm-hmm. Second of all, after all of that, he seemed to be saying, well, maybe there's not genocide.
I mean, that was extraordinary for me because actually he introduced the G20 conversation. It wasn't I think he said, I think we're going to be together at the G20. When is it? I thought that's how it happened. It wasn't Cyril who says we want you at the G20. But Cyril rose to the occasion, really, because he didn't pause. As soon as he saw an opening on the G20, he said, and this was interesting for me. He didn't say the United States started the G20. He said, the G20, we look forward to welcome you to the G20, which you started. So flattery, personalizing that kind of thing. The G20, of course, started in 1999 under a different president of the United States. But I liked how he just jumped and then kind of made a moral appeal, but appealed to his ego to say, you started. And then, of course, I hand over in that Cyril way. I hand over to you. I thought that was good.
Yes, I thought that was excellent. And then also, look, I don't know how to interpret his answer about the ICJ. I mean, either he didn't understand what he was being asked.
Somebody said he probably didn't know what the ICJ is. Or
yeah, but I doubt that. I think he knows very well what the ICJ is, and he knew that the issue was going to come up. And the way he batted it away, I interpret that as meaning he's not going to make an issue out of that. He's on a different track as regards Israel at the moment. I think he's particularly putting on pressure on them not to go ahead with this ground offensive. And given his trip to the Gulf last week, where he actually literally transformed American policy in the Middle East,
on Saudi soil, I think that's the one that's more
Saudi
important.
soil.
Given the 9/11,
must have been very worrying for Netanyahu. So I don't think, I thought coming into this a couple of months ago that ICJ would be the big sticking point.
Yeah, but you know what? Philip, let's just throw the cat among the wheels. It's the truth that the South African government, the South African delegation, those with whom we interacted, their advisors and so on, that's the thing that they were most worried about. And when I go around to panel discussions, to multilateral organizations, it's the Israel matter. And there are many other people who don't believe that the Afrikaner vulnerability, the white genocide is real, that Trump really believes it. I don't know. After yesterday, I think he really believes it. But there are others, a school of thought that says the white genocide is just a subterfuge. We're actually being punished because of the ICJ case. I'm no longer sure about that because honestly, I wondered why Trump. There are rumors that there's tension between Netanyahu and Trump, but others are saying don't get excited. The Israel and US relationship, there's an tight link, and it's just not going to be undone overnight. But at a personal level, I really want to zone in on this about why Trump didn't go for South Africa on the ICJ case and what Congress, what Capitol Hill will make out of that, given the stature and the reverence that they had for Netanyahu, giving him a standing ovation and introducing legislation that didn't pass, of course, that didn't go further, a bill that if you criticize Israel, to criminalize that. But Phil, the last point on this, let's really pause and reflect on how Ivy League institutions, universities, colleges have been the hotbed of the Middle East, Gaza, pro-Palestine protest and clashes between the Jewish students, the Zionist supporters of Israel. It is inconceivable to me that the very center, you could say the United States is part of that, the very center of this explosion and this division that stemmed from October 7, a tragic, awful violation of human rights, an attack against Jewish people, and of course what's been happening in Gaza, which I call a genocide. It made no sense that with the United States being cracking down on students, revoking visas, kidnapping, arresting students, and it's a kidnap, who've written an op-ed and the matters go to court. After all that drama, you've got the protagonists, the very people who catalyzed this kind of pressure on Israel at the ICJ. You've got them there and you did nothing. I don't think it's nothing. It's it's symbolic. It signifies something. I don't know what.
Well, I think it signifies the fact that Trump doesn't really have an ideology. He doesn't really ultimately have even a loyalty. He, other than to his political power, his commercial wealth, and his self-aggrandizement. And I think he sees in the Middle East, given that Russia, Ukraine's going nowhere, the China thing, that's a long way off. He sees in the Middle East, he's got an opportunity, to maybe cut a deal with Iran. And as part of that on the side, use the power that America has to actually start something going, with the Palestinians and Israel, stop the most sort of extreme kind of ongoing killings and threats of taking over the West Bank and Gaza. I think he wants to get the Nobel Peace Prize. I think it's as simple as that. Why?
But he's not going to get it if he flattens Gaza and turns it into the Riviera of the Middle East, like you're saying.
That's a different conversation. He's kind of thinking, like Nixon went to China, I'm going to Iran. Look what he did with Syria, just like that, bang.
Yeah.
Biden could have done that. Biden didn't do it. So I think that the thing about Trump is there's an unpredictability about him.
Yes.
And he can work outside the framework that Washington normally works within. And I think he confounds people. Even his most dedicated followers. I think that's why he's throwing meat to the MAGA people, so they go behind their back to cut a deal, start a conversation going with genocidal South Africa. So I think, it's just the crazy kind of way, he operates and that this town operates. But what is really important, Redi, and this is something you'll appreciate, is that the atmosphere in Washington right now is a little bit like North Korea, okay? Republicans, businessmen, everybody is kind of like looking to the dear leader to understand, reading his lips, all the people down the food chain. Like, you know, what are we got to do, to get in his good books?
Mm.
Because if you put one foot wrong, boy, you're out, you're gone.
Yeah.
Mike Waltz, is going to be national security advisor. He had a
Mm.
separate discussion with Netanyahu, and he
Mhm.
got pushed out. So, if Trump sends the message, it's okay. Talk to South Africa. Then South Africa can start to build, because ultimately the issue here is rebuilding long-term good relations in Washington with the United States.
Mhm.
And you just need a word from dear leader to say, it's okay, you can go ahead and do that. And,
Mm.
then it opens a door. And I think
Okay.
that's the thing that mattered yesterday, for all the horror of the optics of white guys
Yeah, yeah,
talking to
yeah.
white guys, in a sort of, almost a sort of, it was almost obscene
Yeah, there was
in
enough
many
stuff.
ways.
Yeah, yeah.
You know,
But just the last thing on the optics before we get to what may or may not have happened on the trade side in the closed door. I thought it was good, and that's what I want South Africans to understand. I mean, I'm not forcing anyone to see it my way. That those who are kind of shell shocked and appalled at the vulgarity of Trump's, delivery, um, must be mindful that certain things that were expected to happen didn't happen. JD Vance in that room made me nervous because he always plays this bad cop, the way they treated Zelensky and so on. And that, okay, I spoke about his thick eyeliner yesterday. I must let that go. It's an
yeah,
unhealthy
yeah,
obsession with that. But the fact that they were so quiet and they just let the two leaders speak and the golfers and so on, I think that we dodged a bullet. I mean, it could have gone worse.
yeah, no, it could have been, everybody was saying, is he going to get Zelensky? And it was kind of like an attempted Zelensky. I think Cyril must have watched that video with Zelensky,
Yes.
and that's why he didn't push back with the stats. He was respectful. But he came back strongly.
Hmm.
And the thing that is remembered in the U.S. press today is Cyril saying to Trump, I'm sorry, I can't give you a jet.
Yeah,
Your
and
place, you know,
that was
that
funny.
that's
I
that
mean,
that
that was like a
that was a wonderful moment, and Trump actually took it seriously. He said, "Well,
yeah.
actually, I'd accept it." I mean, he was
But he
irritated
was
that
mocking
somebody
him
asked
in
him a
that
question about
superior,
Spain.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I just thought it's important. And we wake up today to op-eds in the New York Times, in the Washington Post. I was on NPR this morning.
Mm,
The South Africans need to understand that right here, the white genocide thing is being reflected and reported on in a way that subverts that story. So how much time do you want to spend on that,
exactly. You want
really?
to get
Let's
it out
just
the
move
way.
along. Let's just move along.
Yeah.
US media, international media is not fixated on this. I was on Deutsche Welle, I was on France 24, I was on the BBC, and
Yeah.
the framing is exactly that, look, false claim of a genocide. So let's go to the cabinet room. What do you think happened? Starlink, trade, AGOA, which reciprocal trade? What do you think happened?
Well, I don't think there were any specific deals that came out of it. I'm sure that Starlink, or rather SpaceX, was part of the discussion, and that's something that there might actually be a discussion about back in South Africa, because Elon Musk is such a vilified and hated figure, actually, and
Here in
currently
DC.
in back in South Africa,
Okay.
in
Yeah.
DC too now. I mean,
Yeah. It's
uh,
not just. Mhm.
yeah. The thing about Musk, though, is, I mean, he's kind of on his way out. He's no longer the force that he was in the early days of the Trump, kind of second administration. When he was literally sat at breakfast every day with his kid on his shoulder.
Yeah, they
Kind
said
of
Trump
getting
was the
in
babysitter,
Trump's
right?
ear.
Trump was a babysitter while Musk took his medication. What does he take?
Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah. So that close relationship. I mean, I don't think Musk is going to disappear completely.
Mm.
He's still there, but I don't think he's at all, or SpaceX or Starlink is at all essential to the U.S. South African relationship. I think
Okay.
there are much bigger kind of fish to fry. I mean, maybe it's more important that Masad Boulos was there, because he's talking about critical minerals, and not just what South Africa can produce, but what South African companies can do, how South Africans can refine minerals. The fact that most of the Central African copper and cobalt is still coming through South African ports. So there's a kind of a better conversation to have. And, Starlink is now going to face competitors. It's going to, Bezos's, kind of guys are sort of like moving in as well. So I think that, the idea of just kind of like capitulating to Musk in order to cut a deal with the Americans, that's not the reality anymore anyway. And, so I'm sure that came up. Apparently Hegseth was there, didn't say anything, but I mean, I think, discussions on
Was he
security
sober?
are going to be, well, it was sort of, it was still kind of I guess lunchtime, who knows?
Yeah,
You know,
with Hegseth, you never know, Anyway.
absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think anything kind of tangible came out.
But I think potential possibilities, what it could look like, the position of South Africa, the potential, the impact on Africa. How much focus do you think they put on Africa? You mentioned Lubito. I think we spoke about it at some point,
Yeah,
and South Africa having these kind of sophisticated financial institutions, infrastructure institutions, that
right.
it's if you're going after South Africa, you are going after the region, the economic hub, right? Do you think he understood
You
that?
can't ignore South Africa.
You can't.
You can't, and yeah, 2.5
Yeah.
billion people in Africa by 2050.
Hmm.
And South Africa is the gateway into that market.
Yeah. And on the tech space, I mean, what can we say to America as South Africa or Africa? I mean, I'm just thinking about the innovations and some of the social problems that we have. I know when I moderated the United Nations and the Secretary General talks about inclusive AI for humanity. The panelists, whether it's Google or Microsoft Foundation or whoever, they think about the problem that you wish to have. And I thought even the Starlink thing, as much as it made people feel that Rupert was just inviting Starlink, I think the context is important. It was just to say there are problems. We
Yeah.
could work together to solve problems, even beyond
Absolutely.
Starlink, what Africa offers as a place for that innovation to address the social problems that we have, socioeconomic
Well, like
problems.
in 25 years' time, almost half the working age population in the world will be in Africa. So it's almost half the people earning salaries, most of them young people, will be in Africa. And the thing about extractive critical minerals is it's not about, the population as a whole. It's about, holes in the ground that you drag stuff out of. Tech, on the other hand, is a kind of industry that involves consumers. It involves everybody. And big decisions are being made about tech now that are going to be, kind of instructive for decades to come, particularly with regard to AI. And so, if the Americans are thinking, okay, we want to keep out the Chinese, the DeepSeek, and all that sort of stuff, then, the point is that the tech giants are here. They're in Africa already. Microsoft, IBM, they're all, the big companies are actually in South Africa. They're engaging irrespective of AGOA, irrespective of what the, Washington thinks about South Africa, because they know, that's not only the market of now, but it's the market of the future.
Okay, so when all is said and done, what happens next? The door is open. We want to hit the ground running. I suppose my final question is around that. Did we solve at least 50% of the problems we had? I think we did. From the ICJ case point of view and also from Iran, I thought that would play out publicly. I don't know whether they discussed it behind closed doors. You and I live on the capital and we hear about Iran and South Africa a lot, but it didn't come out. There are accusations and we've got evidence of this, nothing of the sort. So optimistic? We
Yeah,
solved
no,
some
I
problems?
think what is really important is that South Africa changes the narrative because, Washington for too long has been saying, South Africa is like an enemy. They're friends with all the people, who are enemies of ours. And I think what is starting to change is that South Africa is positioning itself as a non-aligned strategic partner. Because South Africa is the biggest trading partner in Africa of the United States,
Yeah.
of European Union, of China, of India, of the United Kingdom. So, we our kind of like existence as a nation, our importance in the world depends on all of our relationships. And the United States is an important one. It's not the only one. We're not a colony of the United States. We want a partnership with the United States. And I think to rebuild that kind of perspective, it's a new perspective in a way, is really important going forward. And I think the trade negotiations, when you talk about next step, I think South Africa has submitted some kind of a framework for a bilateral trade deal, which they might be very hungry to take at this point.
Okay, my darling, thank you for your time. I just love chatting to you. We could go on and on and on, but I think people are sick and tired of our voice now. Hey, Phillip.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, my dear. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Guys, that's the Readiness Report. I'm so excited to have this space with you, and I'll tell you what's coming up next. I can't wait to chat to you again. Goodbye.